and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Harriet Harman, it's all going on.
Oh, and me, Ruth Davidson.
It's lovely to see you both again. We've spent an awful lot of time together this week, but more on that in a minute because I need to tell you all the things we're talking about in this episode. Now, less than 2 months in, Keir Starmer is dealing with a lot. And I don't mean what they're saying about the state of the public finances or the prison crisis, but the briefings against him, the briefings, the discord in Downing Street that's spilling out into the press. He is having, I would say, the first really roughing up of his premiership. And I imagine he is in an absolutely foul mood at the moment. We're going to get into the government plans around immigration after the PM went to Italy this week. And I want to give you a little primer for the Labour Party conference, which starts this weekend in Liverpool. Now, I go every year, but I've got an added bonus piece of joy this year because we're all going to Liverpool for the third live show of our tour on Sunday. Since we've last recorded, we have seen so many of you on our shows in London and Salford. Ladies, how has it been? Harriet, have you liked it?
I think it's been incredible to, there's such an energy. I honestly, I know performers say this, but there's such an energy about a live show and, not just being here in London or Ruth in Scotland, but actually going out there and engaging with people. I think it's been incredible.
Ruth, have you been loving hanging out with me?
Yeah, I've been loving
time?
hanging out with you all the time. I've been slightly astonished, actually, that the questions involve things like snog, marry, avoid several very prominent politicians, and we have to answer it.
It's also amazing who Ruth will snog, I think.
I don't think we want to go into this, Beth.
No, we don't. That's for live audience only. But come along, Liverpool, Labour conference. I think there's a handful of tickets left. Come along, honestly, it is a laugh.
I feel so dirty. I've been a member of the Conservative Party for so many years I can't even count them. Because of the way it works, we had to get accreditation for the Labour Party conference. And the day that my Labour Party conference lanyard dropped through the bloody door, I mean, I really did feel quite sort of dirty inside. Yeah.
Did you? Did you go a bit tribal?
I did. And I tried to not be tribal.
When you get to conference, Ruth, everybody's going to be so nice to you because you've got so much fans amongst the Labour Party.
You're doing nothing for my credibility.
Oh my gosh, is she really joining us now?
Nothing for my credibility within the Tories by saying that, Harriet.
Right, okay, we're going to do some news now. News. Let's get to the podcast. We've got to talk about Frockgate. It's the story that won't go away for Keir Starmer this week. We're also going to talk about Sue Gray, his chief of staff, and some awful briefing wars going on. But let's start off with Frockgate. It started in the Sunday Times with Lady Victoria Starmer receiving £5,000 worth of clothes from a Labour donor. These clothes weren't immediately declared. They came from the party donor called Lord Ali. You might have heard of him because he'd already been someone that had donated Keir Starmer thousands of pounds worth of clothes and glasses amounting to well over £16,000. So that was already in the public domain. And no, I'm not sure that passed the sniff test. But anyway, then it turns out that Vic Starmer had also got some donations from Lord Ali. It's sort of spun into a debate about political donations. We've had stories about all sorts of gifts the PM's accepted, from Arsenal tickets to £2,000 glasses from Lord Ali. Ruth, can you sort of explain what the problem is here? Number 10 is saying it was an oversight about Lady Starmer's clothing. They didn't realise that as his spouse, it needed to be declared. It was all done before the election. I have to say, I can imagine knowing him a bit and how protective he is about his family. He's going to be in a stinky mood that Vic has been dragged into this and her salary and what's going on?
I think there's a couple of things that are going on here. One is that it reveals that Keir's team can't do crisis comms. The second thing is the hypocrisy, because Keir Starmer, rode into town, he put it even in his manifesto, how they're going to be whiter than white. They went after Boris Johnson for getting a Tory donor to buy his wallpaper. But the other thing is, what does this tell you about the priorities of this government? That a guy whose family, joint income, him and Vic, are on over £200,000, £200,000, are saying it's totally fine for somebody else to buy us our clothes because we can't afford to buy our own clothes. But the first thing they did in government was to tell pensioners on £13,000 that actually you have to start paying for all of your heating now because you are rich enough and we're going to take your fuel allowance off you. So there, for me, what's kind of damaging about all of this, I mean, Lord Ali has been in and around Labour forever. What he spends his money on is up to him. But, in terms of the operation, the sniff test, the look and the hypocrisy, it's not been a great week for Keir Starmer this week.
That was a very good prosecution there, Ruth. And I've been talking around in government with people about this behind closed doors. You start off where people do the defence of the rules. Like he followed the rules, he followed the letter of the law. And then when you say, yeah, but what about the sniff test, about how it looks? How does it look that someone, as Ruth says, earns a lot of money, is getting someone else to pay for their work clothes? And this is a guy that has talked about his integrity, and it's uncomfortable. And then when you start asking people around government about that, I think there is an acknowledgement that this is not a good look. And I think that someone was saying to me that they need to take another look at how this stuff looks rather than just arguing that it follows the letter of the law. I mean, Starmer has got to do a massive media round. We're recording this on Thursday. By the time it comes out on Friday, he'll have done about dozens of local interviews. It's the time of the year when the Labour leader, the PM, the Conservative leader does it as well. You do all the media rounds ahead of party conference. So he's going to be all over the airwaves. And I think that he is going to have to, shift position on this, Harriet. What do you think?
He obviously wants to, with a new government that he's leading, which he said is about a government of public service. He wants to be talking about the buses, the trains, the health service, green energy, tackling illegal immigration. So I should think he is beyond frustrated with this. But when something like this comes up, there's a choice. You can either double down on it and try and justify it, or you can just say, it was probably a misstep. If I had my time again, I wouldn't do it. And therefore, I don't know, I'm going to auction it for charity or something. And it was just a misstep. I mean, it's not a hanging offence, but I think doubling down and trying to justify it is, for some of the reasons that Ruth said, making things worse. So I think he does need to get it out the way before conference. And I think he'll be feeling bad about it because, he is not that sort of person. He's not, a sort of money-focused, greedy type of person. He is a person of public service. So this is kind of slightly out of line and he'll be wanting to deal with it.
I think the struggle is, this isn't just one thing. The whole of free gear Keir trending stuff is because he took literally the highest number of freebies, the highest value amount of 650 people in the House of Commons. This wasn't this he got some guy to buy him a suit before he went to the G7 and his wife got a frock. It's that he did it again and again and again. It's the layer upon layer of rock here that kind of buries him. It's not just he did one thing, somebody told him he really needed it, it was organised for him, he wasn't really on top of it, he'll never do it again because he's been burned now. It was this has been going on for years now, since he became leader of the opposition, that he's been taking free stuff. And the fact that nobody in his operation could sniff it out and think it was going to bite him in the bum at some point, again, speaks to a slight naivety, possibly, because there's a big change in the level of scrutiny you have going from opposition to government, and possibly also just a little bit of a kind of a mote in his own eye that he can't see that what he goes after the Tories for will absolutely come after him.
But he's got a choice now, hasn't he, Ruth? He can either do defiance or he can do recognition. And I think he needs to recalibrate and just recognise that with hindsight, it wasn't a good thing to do.
I think that's right. I agree with that. I think the difficulty is because it's a pattern. It's not an incident, and that's a much harder thing to recalibrate for.
But he can just say, this is what I'm going to do in the future. I mean, Boris Johnson had no compunction at all. It was complete defiance about the wallpaper and the holidays and everything like that. I don't think Keir Starmer will want to do that.
Contrition's quite important here because the issue that particularly I think Rishi had was that he found this sort of stuff irresistible, and it looked as if it was for the little people. and that it was all getting in the way of him doing a bigger job. And I think his response to personal criticism showed a smallness in terms of, and a short-temperedness, which was really unattractive.
I don't think he should do sackcloth and ashes. I think that's, overdoing it. He just needs to say, right, with hindsight, I'm going to do things differently. This is how I'm going to do it in future. And everybody will then move on to the things that really they care about. And I just do remember at the outset of Tony Blair's government, there was loads of kind of turbulence and things that were not intended or expected. You remember we had Tony's cronies, we had the Bernie Ecclestone stuff. We seem to be lurching. It takes a while to settle into Downing Street, and I think he'll want to be settling this all down very quickly.
I mean, for what it's worth, I have picked up people that are close to him, people that like him, talking around this issue, that there has been a bit of disquiet about why he was taking all these freebies. He's racked up, as Ruth says, over 100 grand since 2019. He's done more than any other MP. And it does slightly jar, doesn't it, with kind of his identity as a man of integrity. I mean, that's his whole shtick, right?
This is why he's just got to say, this is how I'm going to do it in the future.
But can you see how, from the public's point of view, they might be a bit confused because they're like, hang on, you're like a man of integrity, but you're taking all these freebies. Like, did you not realise that might look off?
Probably because it is actually, in practice, in fact, within the rules. But of course, there's not just the rules, but how people feel about what you do. So it's, okay, he obeyed the rules except with one technical breach of late registration, which is not great, but not a hanging offence. And he did something within the rules, which actually... on reflection, doesn't look like the way he wants to carry on in the future. And he can just say that.
The other thing that I have, and Ruth, I don't know if you're going to disagree with me, I personally do, and I'm going to say I have a little bit of sympathy about this. He really, really loves Arsenal, and he loved Arsenal before he became a politician. When he is leader of the opposition and now he's prime minister, he just cannot sit in the stands. Can you see a world in which, that isn't unreasonable for him to take that hospitality because... he can't go. For security reasons, he can't go.
I know you're an Arsenal fan, so I know that you have sympathies that lie here. But I mean, I think to govern is to choose, and to take on big jobs means that you do make sacrifices. And if he thinks that he can't sit in the stands, that's fine. But he has to choose either to pay for hospitality himself or to not go because he's working more hours than he has worked before. And I'm not sure there's many politicians that have free Saturdays multiple times a year in order to go to the football, particularly not ones that are supposed to be leading a party that wants to become the government. Or three, if you accept the hospitality, then frankly, you don't get to be sniffy about the fact you take your lumps when people say you've just taken 40 grand's worth of free stuff. I'm sorry, that's your choices. You have a point. These are the choices that are there. You don't get a miraculous fourth choice where you get to take 40 grand worth of free stuff, get to go to the football all the time, and don't have anybody saying anything about it.
Although I'd just like to say I bought my bloody Wolves tickets and it cost me a fortune.
And that's a choice that you have made. You chose.
It was a choice I made.
To buy them.
A very expensive choice I made. Had a great time though. And they won.
I think Ruth is completely right that it's just about a choice. And he's just really, I think at the moment, just got to put everything in terms of the government of service and just get rid of every distraction he possibly can. There's no right or wrong here.
Okay, so
it's just a question of a choice that he feels that is justified and that people in the country will be happy with.
Okay, so we've all come to the conclusion that basically he needs to just not take any more freebies. If he wants to do something, pay for it. And take the pain of buying Arsenal tickets or whatever it is, and then he can just kind of move on.
Or he does a Boris Johnson and brazens it out and gets a reputation for being grasping, which Tony Blair had to a degree as well, and others have done.
So I have spent so many months now, following Keir Starmer around. It's like it's not healthy, right? But that's my job. And the thing I have learnt about him in these observations, the interviews, the dozens of things I've gone to watch and the speeches, he really cares about integrity, respect. So I think if he wants to try and stick with that value, I don't think he does have a choice. I think he's got to try and kill this. We agree?
Yeah.
Hopefully he's listened to this pod and he'll now do this all in interviews subsequently.
Well, he's certainly not going to be want to be talking about it. Nobody will be wanting to talk about it in the run up to our conference, which is a massive thing.
To be blunt about it, I'll get an interview with him next week around conference, and if it's not cleaned up, then we will be talking about it, won't we? We need to also talk about the other thing that has probably put Keir Starmer into a pretty foul mood. And that's about his top aide, a woman called Sue Gray. You probably know who she is because she did the Partygate report. Remember, she was a very senior civil servant. She went off to be Keir Starmer's chief of staff. She is now back in government as his chief of staff. And there is a story that has been leaked to my colleagues at the BBC about how she's paid more than the Prime Minister. And it is quite a nasty briefing against Sue Gray, who has been the subject of briefings. Now, in a way, does it matter? It does matter, Harriet, doesn't it? Because of not necessarily the story per se, but what it tells us about what's going on in government, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Sue Gray is an incredibly able person, and she is being paid the rate for the job. And what is worrying about this is that people, quotes, within Downing Street, unquotes, are briefing and putting that pay into the public domain. I mean, the cabinet secretary earns 200,000. The guy who runs Manchester City Council gets 220,000. She is not, you might think all this public service pay is too high, but actually she is getting the rate for the job, and she is an exceptional and talented person to be doing that job. Keir Starmer will be wanting to work out who is doing this briefing, because that is a breach of the ministerial code. Special advisors are not supposed to go out stirring trouble against any of their colleagues or any other government ministers. I think that he could be forgiven for thinking, for goodness sake, there aren't any fundamental policy divisions here. How are we having an argument about something where there seem to be some disgruntlement amongst people for what they're earning when they're in government? They ought to be absolutely thrilled and delighted to be able to be in public service, to be in government, to play that role, and to be moaning about their pay and complaining about Sue Gray's pay, I think is really unforgivable. So I think, he'll really want to clamp down on that. They're obviously just not, whoever is doing this is not suitable to be in government.
Ruth, what do you think?
It's a proper drive-by, isn't it? They properly took her legs out. And the thing was, this wasn't like some enterprising journalist that went and truffled it out. This was somebody that decided they were going to do her. They were going to absolutely take her out at the knees. They put it together. They gift wrapped it in a bow. They put it on a shiny silver platter, and they delivered it to, in this case, the BBC, but it actually could have been anybody. And they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew the time that they were doing it, the week before party conference. In terms of disloyalty within the group, I mean, if they find this person, I mean, this is a proper kind of hanging offence.
Oh, totally.
The only arguments that should be happening in government right now is the chief spad for each minister should be having a squabble every morning about who gets to have the media grid that day for their good shiny announcement. That's the period of government we should be in. This is really bad form.
So the PM's paid 166 and she's paid 170. So the whole story was Sue Gray's paid more than the Prime Minister. But, it is a bit annoying when you can't. It's like it was gift wrapped, and as Ruth said, it's like these are the quotes that have gone in the piece from whoever briefed this story. This is one of the quotes. It was suggested that she might want to go for a few £1,000s less than the Prime Minister to avoid this story. She declined. That was one quote.
Which she's denied.
And then, but then there's this other one. Hang on. It speaks to the dysfunctional way Number 10's being run, no political judgment, and increasingly Grand Sue, who considers herself to be the Deputy Prime Minister, hence the salary, and no other voice for the PM to hear, as everything gets run through Sue. So what you're getting there is someone has got the figure, they've briefed it out to the BBC for maximum impact. People in Number 10 are absolutely furious. And I made a few calls on this over the past day. Someone said to me that people are disgruntled with Sue. I think there's also some issues around people not being happy about how jobs have been handed out in government and also what people are getting paid, right? So like in every organisation, people aren't happy about what they're getting. That is quite a normal thing in any business or any public body, right? But they're briefing and attacking her. I think Starmer will go out when he's asked about it, and he will be very clear that she is his chief of staff. Whatever briefings are against her, it's not going to change. They are not going to let these briefings be the downfall of Sue Gray. But what it speaks to is an almighty dysfunction in a Downing Street that's only just got going, and that this was happening a bit in opposition as well, and Starmer absolutely hated it. So I imagine between Frockgate and this, he is probably a very grumpy man today, Harriet.
I think it also shines a light on the issue of people from inside Downing Street getting the protection of journalists not revealing their sources, which obviously is a very important thing so that people can find out wrongdoing and they can whistleblow and everything. But this is somebody using anonymity to do something that they would never do in the public domain, because it would be gross misconduct and they'd be fired straight away.
I always feel slightly conflicted about these stories because they're kind of massive Westminster stories and we all gossip about it all the time. But in the real world, like, do you care, right? You only care because they're people running government, and if it becomes dysfunction, then the country's not run very well. And then the story is not, I don't know if it's necessarily the briefing quotes about slagging off Sue Gray. It's more about the story about the dysfunction in government, that someone is spinning this out. But then when you get given it, you're going to run it, aren't you? Of course you're going to run it.
Of course you are. And I think people want Downing Street to be focused on the issues of concern to the country. And one of the things they hated about the Tory government was the infighting. But, I think that Keir Starmer is somebody who, having been a prosecutor, will go on evidence and beyond reasonable doubt and all of that. But actually, he will need to get a grip on this, because Sue Gray is getting the rate for the job. She is a highly qualified, excellent person who will be an asset to this new Labour government, and he's got to get all of this stuff out of the way.
She's also bulletproof now. Whoever did this and tried to take her out has absolutely made her unsackable for at least the next year.
But don't you think an older woman in authority, younger men who are sort of, thrusting themselves forward, and there's an older woman in authority, it kind of rankles with some of them?
Yes, doesn't it just? Yes. There has been this whole rumbling, and I pick it up from some, and I don't know if you do, Harriet, and I imagine you do, from some of the Labour women, about a sense that there's quite a boys club, and some of the women feel a bit shut out, and then Sue Gray comes in and they feel that there is a champion for them as well. That's what they tell me, over a coffee. If you picked that up, that there was a sense that they felt like it was a bit of a boys' club, and Sue kind of began to change that culture a bit, and now there's blowback.
I'm not sure, because there was a lot of, senior figures like Deborah Mattinson, who we've talked about on this podcast.
Hopefully
and
on this podcast.
It wasn't a sort of men-only boys' club around Keir Starmer. It wasn't. And then you've got Rachel Reeves, who's one of the most senior people in and out of the leader's office the whole time. So I don't think it was that.
There is a fundamental truth here too, though, which is that actually the special advisors, the key personnel that are behind-the-scenes personnel, should be staying behind the scenes. You actually don't ever want your Alistair Campbells or your Damien McBrides or your Dominic Cumminses or your Sue Grays or your Morgan McSweeneys to ever really become the story, because that points to a more fundamental failing.
I think you're right, though. If you are Keir Starmer now, you are absolutely not going to move her. It would be such a sign of weakness from a Prime Minister. So in a way, as uncomfortable as she must feel, it must be horrible, right? I think, as you said, Ruth, I 100% agree with you, which it just means that he cannot move her now. And also, I think it does speak as well to they need to get a grip on the operation, and be that, the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, he's basically the most senior civil servant in government. He was put in by Boris Johnson. And Keir Starmer is going to move him. It's like, get on with it, like reshape the Whitehall machine, tidy up your office, try and find the mole, try and find the leak. Not that many people could have known Sue Gray's salary, right?
I'm such a sad person that I went onto Civil Service World's website last night to have a look at how many people were paid more than the Prime Minister, and it's like over 600 people, and some of them are up in the kind of the guy that's in charge of HS2 is on over 600 grand. The woman in charge of atomic energy is on over 400 grand, and Simon Case, the permanent secretary, and also the Cabinet Office permanent secretary, Sir Alex Chisholm, they're both on over 200 grand, so well over the Prime Minister's salary as well. So, I mean, it's not as if this is a remarkable necessarily thing, but the reason it's a news story is because it's a hit job from Keir's team on one of Keir's team.
God, being in government, man. Do you feel sorry for him, Harriet?
No, because I think he went in there knowing that it's a very difficult job to do and that he's determined to do it in the interests of the country. So he will just want to sort this and have the right team around him and focus on all the other things that he's concerned about. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think he thought it was going to be an easy ride, and nor is it.
Can I ask you one more thing, Harriet? Do you think Sue Gray might think, oh, sod this and walk?
Not if I've got anything to do with that. I think she's a public-spirited person. I think she will grit her teeth. She's got a job to do and she will get on with it.
Can I just say, Sue Gray ran a pub in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, in the borderlands. The idea that some wee naff junior staffer in number 10 is going to win and she's not going to dig in and she's not going to front them down and she's not going to find out who it was and she's not going to get them out in their ear. I'm sorry, away.
She is very serene and steely. She'll tough it out.
We're back and I want to take a step back and talk about migration today because aside from all the politics and the argy-bargy back in number 10, what we haven't discussed for some time and frankly is quite devastating is what's going on in the English Channel. This week, 8 people died in the Channel trying to cross in a rubber boat. 2 weeks ago, another boat sank in the Channel. 12 people died, including 6 children and a pregnant woman. 45 people have died attempting the crossing this year, and just this month so far, over 2,500 people have arrived in small boats. Starmer flew to Italy this week to meet their PM, Giorgia Meloni, and he paid £4 million to be part of their Rome process for tackling illegal migration. Now, I have to say that when you talk to people in government, they're now saying to me on the list of priorities, it's cost of living, NHS, small boats, i.e. this is, in terms of the public's priorities, this problem is massive. It's not just a kind of conservative problem to see off reform politically. It's actually something that's really, really concerning the public. Starmer talks about smashing the gangs, but when he went to talk to Meloni, he is also keeping the option open of having some other type of return scheme. She is currently working on a plan to process illegal migrants in Albania. Harriet, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that he's really right to be pressing down on this issue of the organised crime. And there's a problem here with people actually drowning at sea, as you said, which is absolutely tragic. And there's also a problem of border security. If you've got people coming in and you don't know who they are, then your border security is undermined. So I think that working with proper organisational efficiency and coherence here, and also working closely with our European allies, that's important, but also returns. And I think Yvette Cooper, as Home Secretary, has already increased the returns. And the thing about the returns is it's really frustrating because there is lots of kind of what you'd regard as low-hanging fruit in terms of returns. When I was in Holloway Prison just before it closed a few years ago, about 30% of the women that were in that prison were foreign national offenders who actually had been quite oppressed and abused in organised crime, whether they were from Eastern Europe or whether they were from Jamaica, involved in drug offences, that they needed to be deported back home to where their children were rather than in prison in this country. So I think that with a proper focus on returns, signing agreements with a whole load of countries, they could go one by one through all the people that actually shouldn't be here. And that's what people want. But it's also the other thing we've got to recognise with all of this is the pull factor. And I remember once visiting a very poor village in northern Nigeria where a whole load of young boys were playing football. And on their sort of changing hut, there was loads of pictures of Manchester United. And they were living in real poverty with no sense of a future there. And it was like the beacon. that it's English speaking, and we've got global brands. This is the part of being global Britain. And therefore, people will want to come here. Now, the point is to make sure that if they come legally and they don't get exploited by these organised crimes.
I'm going to bring Ruth in, and then I'm going to get you to come back to this, Harriet, because this is what he said when he was asked about a potential Albania scheme to process migrants and was quizzed about whether this would be acceptable to him. The first thing he said, well, actually, it's not. The fact that numbers are going down in Italy isn't attributable to that scheme because it hasn't started. But then he said he'd like to return to British pragmatism. We are pragmatists first and foremost. When we see a challenge, we discuss with our friends and allies the different approaches that are being taken and look at what works. So that, to me, is in political language. I mean, it's not answering the question, but it's definitely not saying, no, I on principle don't want to have a look at an Albania return scheme. I mean, Ruth, what did you think of that? He's a pragmatist.
Well, I also thought he was standing next to Giorgia Meloni at the point at which he said it, after she'd stood up and said he's very interested in this. And he did sort of say, it's early days, it's very early days, it's very early days, which is sort of diplomatic, nice speak for, we're probably not going to do this, but I can't say that in front of her, is my reading of that. But I do think, whether it is Australia, whether it's us, whether it's others, you can't just offshore your migration problem to other countries. I think that every country absolutely has the right to decide who comes and lives here and who doesn't, and what those criteria are, and that they're applied fairly and transparently. And you get to say, no, you don't have to take everyone. Of course you don't. Nor should you. You have no moral obligation whatsoever for that. But I think you do have a moral obligation to make those decisions in your home country, not just pay some poor country that's got its own problems to do it for you.
I completely agree with Ruth about this. And I think that it's not just the tragedy of the lives lost, and it's not just the undermining of border security when we just don't know who's coming in on these boats. But another casualty of this is that the constant beating of the drum of anti-immigrants, which makes people here from immigrant families feel somehow unwelcome and that this is a kind of hostile place. And it makes us look to the rest of the world as if we are not the sort of place that if you are a brilliant student in India, that where would you choose? Are you going to choose to come to the UK, or are you going to go to America or Canada instead? Are we a welcoming global place? And, the fact of the matter is that this country is built on the dynamism of immigrants as well as the people who are here. And if you have some sort of accident, you wake up in a hospital bed, you're likely to be surrounded by a team that looks like the League of Nations. I mean, immigrants who've fled awful situations and come here legally, they play an incredible dynamic part in our economy and how we want to be. And I don't want us to be like St Albans in the 1950s, where it was, inward looking and homogeneous.
And I agree. I think the case for positive migration, for getting the brightest and best in the world to come here, making the case for immigration, I haven't heard that actually from either side, particularly not my own, who've been actively hostile, but there's been almost a tacit kind of silence from Labour when they were in opposition about the value of immigration and what we place on it. And I think we should be talking about the different types of entry to this country. And yes, we've got absolute obligations in terms of refugees that come here. We've got, and people who are claiming asylum because their country is too difficult. But we also have people who know that they don't fall into that category and are trying anyway and are doing it through illegal routes, as well as people that are making applications and going through all the form filling and getting the job and the sponsorship and all the rest of it. So I think we have to have a more sophisticated conversation, and one that takes a lot of the heat out of it, but shines a lot more light on it.
But it's difficult to have that unheated conversation when you've got the lack of control in the boats. I totally agree with you, Ruth, about students. I mean, we should take them out of the immigration figures. I think people recognise how important it is to have students here from all around the world. It's part of our soft power. Our universities are a major sector. And also, we need the reciprocal arrangements with Europe so that our young people can go and spend some time in Europe.
Let's just cut to the chase, though. He has got to fix this problem, hasn't he?
Yeah, but
There's
I think
no
that
option.
with returns, I think with the tackling the organised crime, with the European cooperation, he can show some progress.
Harriet, I'm going to ask you one more thing, because when I asked a cabinet minister the other day about the Albania returns, I said, "Whew, that's quite, given how opposed in principle Labour was to Rwanda." This person said to me that they were, quote, relaxed about it, i.e., if that's what the government decides to do, if that's what Starmer decides to do. Are you relaxed about it? Are you relaxed about the idea about processing migrants or asylum seekers coming across illegally on boats? Are you happy about them being processed in a third country, or in principle are you not?
Well, you can have a situation where people are being processed in France by UK authorities. So actually processing people where they are rather than waiting till they come here and processing them. I don't think there's any in principle objection to that.
Would you want to send people from here somewhere else?
I think sending people to Rwanda, it wasn't going to work and it was completely wrong. But I think there was a big pragmatic argument. I don't think Italy, anyway, has started that programme yet. I think they're talking about processing people who are trying to come over from Albania and working with the Albanians to move the passport and the visa office outwards. And I think that makes sense, so that you cooperate and you move your high commissions.
Okay. I think this is one we're going to come back to because I think it will evolve. Rishi Sunak made tackling small boats the litmus test of his government. Keir Starmer hasn't done that, but I think failure to do it is going to cause him massive problems with voters.
I mean, fundamentally, it was supposed to be a deterrent, wasn't it? But if you're prepared to risk death, then you're going to risk the 0.0 something % of being sent to Rwanda at some future time. So it was just never going to work.
Well, look, let's park that because we're going to be coming back to it. Let's get to conferences because it's going to be very busy for all of us because Ruth is a newly signed up member of the Labour Party conference.
God, don't. I feel so dirty inside.
Are you going to the Tories as well?
I'm not actually, no, because we're not going to that. No, I'm not going this year.
What?
Yeah.
Who am I going to hang out with?
Well, I had to go to a lot of Tory conferences as part of my job for a really long time. So, yeah, when I don't have to go, I don't go.
We should have contracted you to just come and hang out with me there.
I mean...
It's outrageous. Well, we're all going to Labour. We've had the Lib Dems. Reform have theirs this weekend, and then it's Labour, and then it's the Tories in Birmingham the week after. Ladies, they are weird places, aren't they? If you have not been before to party conference. When I was younger, I used to sort of do the whole go to all the fringes, do all the circuit, stay out till 2 a.m.
Are we going to do that?
No, Harriet, we are not. No. Then Robert Shrimsley, who is very beloved to me. You will probably not know who he is. Robert, I hope you're listening to this and you feel a little warm glow as I say this. Robert Shrimsley was the news editor at the Financial Times and now he's a brilliant columnist. And he was my mentor when I was a pup at the FT. And he once said to me when I started in politics, he said, the only way you can get through conference is to not drink. And I was like, are you absolutely mental? The only way you can get through conference is to drink. Anyway, I've learnt the hard way that Robert was right. So I am like a sort of paragon of virtue at conference. Basically, you have to get to bed before midnight so you don't turn into a pumpkin or just really grumpy. And then you can't drink any alcohol because it is a stamina business. Anyway, this is Thomas. He sent us a question about conference.
Hi, Beth. Love the podcast. I'm going to my first Labour Party conference and it's really exciting, but I'm only 17, so also a bit daunting. I know you've been to a few, so I just wondered whether you could give me a sense of what it's really like. Are there any events you'd recommend? Also, be honest, is the nightlife better at Labour or Tory party conference?
Well, look, Thomas, you can't drink anyway because you're 17, so that takes that off the table for you. Is the nightlife... I tell you what is a good party at Labour, which I never get to go to because I'm too busy being the political editor these days and working on the news at 10 and whatever other thing they're making me do, instead of going to the party. The Mirror Party. Come on, Harriet. Have you been to the Mirror Party at Labour?
Always.
It's like a disco, isn't it? It's like always in a nightclub. There's karaoke. There's like normally the lobby at 2 a.m. dancing to the Killers.
But I would say to Thomas, look at the conference agenda, all those fringe meetings, there's incredibly interesting discussion. You'll have all sorts of different social activities. There'll be the socialist societies like the Socialist Environmental Association, the Fabian Society, and you can just cram it full with all the progressive stimulation together with staying up really, really late and drinking loads.
I feel really shamed now. I was like, yeah, anyway, Thomas, so boozing and parties. And then Harriet's like, and these are all the fringes you can go to, Thomas. So I feel ashamed of myself. No, but really, Harriet is spot on. Have a look at the programme. There'll be loads of fringes. It is a real laugh. And also, like, if you're like cabinet ministers you like or you're interested in, you can go and see them because they'll be at a fringe. So you can go and find them, but make sure if it's a big one, like if it's an Angie Rayner fringe or even a Keir Starmer, I don't know if he has time anymore, go early because there'll be a massive queue.
I mean, when I was deputy leader, I would regularly do 30 evening fringes, all the different receptions, and then I would
awful.
chat. Well, no,
that sounds exhausting.
No, because then you get to chat to everybody and you hear what they're saying, and you can see people from West Wales and from Scotland. Although actually
30 fringes.
Yeah, 30
God.
was,
I couldn't even attend them, let alone perform at them. Right, both of you, I want your best conference stories. Come on.
So I don't have any kind of got really drunk, played strip poker, pulled somebody, had the awkward walk of shame the next day story or anything like that.
No, that's Harriet's story.
I'll leave that for Harriet. But yeah, I think probably the one that I'm kind of, almost in a weird way, sort of proudest of was a Tory party conference. You have to kind of submit your speech to the central CCHQ vetters. They're in charge of putting it on the auto cue for you, but it's also so they can see that you're not saying anything that's bad. And in 2016, if you remember, there was a party conference where Amber Rudd was Home Secretary. And the day before the main sort of Theresa May platform speech, she'd done a policy that was about having to list foreign nationals at your company. It was part of this immigration sort of thing. And I found it quite horrific. The overtones of it were pretty bad. So I had been picked to be the last kind of main platform speech before the Prime Minister the next day. So it would be a full hall. It would sort of be just before her introduction. And I completely took home my speech, rewrote it that night, added sections all about immigration. I really felt like for my own personal integrity, I had to kind of plant a flag and completely dropped it in, didn't run it past anyone, changed the kind of person that was running the auto cue, gave them the updated one. None of it. I just like, right, I'm just doing this. I just have to do this.
Nice. I like that. Taking back control of the podium there.
Also, I ran massively over because I had to write extra sections to fit it all in. I didn't want to take out anything I said. So, you'll find this hard to believe, Beth, but I talked for too long. Surprise. I know. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Well, all this talk about conference and auto cue is very triggering for me because my worst experience was when, just before the 97 election, when there was a big debate in the party about whether or not we should increase the basic state pension across everybody universally or whether we should have means-tested help for the poorest pensioners. And I was arguing that money was short and we needed to have means testing of pensioners. So I wrote this very careful speech, and then I went up onto the platform to listen to the debate and was listening to all the speeches and everything, and then got up to the podium to start reading out my speech from the auto cue. And then about halfway through, the speech turned out to be something completely different than what I'd written. And I was like, what is this? And you're trapped. You can't say, actually, this isn't the speech I've written. So I was reading it, and literally each word, I didn't know what was happening. So I went backstage and I said to my special advisor, who was Ed Miliband? I said, what happened to my speech? That was not the speech that I'd written, that we'd written. And he said, Gordon came round and he wanted to improve it. So he basically changed it. But I didn't know because I was sitting on the platform. And that was like, and I never used auto cue. I never used auto cue again. I had
literally got stitched up on stage.
I did. But I learnt the lesson, which is you have your own paper thing and but that was pretty remarkable.
Did you speak to him afterwards?
Do you know, I can't even remember. I can't remember.
Did you duff up Ed Miliband for allowing it to happen?
Well, it was difficult for Ed Miliband because actually Gordon Brown was the, big high command. And although Ed worked for
advisor.
Yeah, he was my advisor. But, he was trying to do the right thing.
You've forgiven him 20 years later. But I'm actually so angry. I feel like going up to Scotland to have a go at Gordon Brown on your behalf. Before we go, we've had one more voice note. This is from Ian.
Hi Beth, Ruth, Harriet, love the pod. My husband and I are very excited to see you guys in Liverpool, and we've debated for a long time on what questions to ask. Given it's my birthday on the date of your show, we just wanted to double check, will wine be available at the gig?
Yes. Ian, wine is available. Also gin and tonics are available, Haribo's are available. Now, that's so nice you're coming on your birthday to spend it with us. I feel a bit cryy now. Do you know what I mean?
Again, I'm astonished. I mean, I have to say, if my partner took me out to see us for our birthday, I think that would be a short route to divorce.
Oh, all right.
The live shows are absolutely the date night.
So on the London show, Harriet had a former advisor who had come and was part of the audience, who texted her in advance going, "There's an awful lot of people on date night here," which was really exciting to us because we never assumed that we would be a kind of, a mood setter.
So, yes, thank you for coming, Ian. We should probably buy you a drink. Do you think that the ED podcast could stretch to a birthday drink?
I'm sure we could.
Laura, our producer, she's not actually nodding. She's just said, we'll see. I'll buy you a drink. Don't you worry. Now, this is your final reminder. If you want to come and see us, because there are a couple of tickets left for Sunday in Liverpool, I think there's a very, very small amount left. And Jess is there with us. And that's going to be interesting because we can ask her about life in government and just have a laugh with Jess. And you'll remember too that Harriet was Jess's first pick for this pod. Do you remember when we had to have Jess stand-ins because she was doing the election? The first bat phone she called was Harriet Harman's. And now look at us. It's nice, isn't it?
It's going to be great, though, when she comes back to be the guest to tell us from inside government.
We're also in Glasgow next week with Kirsty Walk, but I'm sorry, that one is sold out, babies. All the details in the show notes for this episode. So a few tickets left for Liverpool if you would like to join us. But remember, also, if you've got something you want to ask us, send us a voice note to the burner phone on 07934 200 444 or email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. It was an absolute pleasure, as always. Thanks for listening and goodbye.
Onward to conference.
Bye.